So if you're anything like me, building an aquarium stand can be a little bit daunting at first because after all, our aquariums are pretty heavy and you want to make sure that whatever stand you're building is going to be strong enough to support that weight. So as you can see, I just finished my 90-gallon aquarium stand and I'm going to show you exactly step by step how I built this aquarium stand and the design that I chose to use. And I believe this is one of the strongest aquarium stand designs that you can do. In fact, this aquarium stand should have the capacity to hold well over 8,000 pounds, which is going to be plenty strong for the 90-gallon that it is going to be supporting. And even if you have a different size aquarium that you're looking to build an aquarium stand for, in this video, I'm going to show you some really simple calculations that you can use in order to determine how long you need to cut every single piece of wood for whatever size aquarium you're looking to build a stand for. And later in this video, I'm also going to show you a really awesome online tool that you can use for free in order to determine exactly how strong your aquarium stand is going to be so that you can be sure that it's going to support the weight of your aquarium. So let's get into the build. And in fact, my favorite part of this aquarium stand is that the entire front panel here comes off of the stand, which gives me tons of room for the sump that is going to be underneath my 90-gallon. So I'll show you that and then we'll get into the build. So as you can see here, because I am running a sump under this aquarium, one of the most important design considerations for me was to not have a center brace obstructing my ability to get the sump in and out of the aquarium stand. So in order to do that, I chose a design that has all of these supports on the four corners of the stand, and I ended up increasing the thickness of the top brace here. Generally, people use 2x4s to construct aquarium stands. In this case, at least for the top brace here, we're using 2x6s and everything else is 2x4s. And that online tool that I mentioned earlier is going to be what we're going to use in order to determine if a 2x6 is required. So for example, if you have a larger aquarium and you want to do a similar design or you're not 100% sure if a 2x4 is going to be enough support for the weight of your aquarium, we can use that online tool to show exactly when you need to increase the thickness of the wood at the top of our aquarium stand. So the beautiful thing about this aquarium stand design is that it's actually really simple to put together. The materials that you'll need is dimensional lumber, which in most cases is going to be 2x4s. And to put everything together, I use these, which are just generic construction screws. These are number 8 screws that are 2.5 inches long, and I use these for all of the connections in this aquarium stand build. So the first step to building this aquarium stand was the top brace here. So as I mentioned, I did construct that out of 2x6s, but we will get into the online tool later in this video that you'll be able to use to determine if 2x4s are going to be okay for the stand that you're building. But the construction of it is really simple. It's just a rectangular brace, basically the size or the footprint of whatever aquarium that you want to be building your aquarium stand for. And I do have one center brace in between in order to prevent any kind of twisting of the wood. And all of that gets put together with the construction screws that I showed earlier. And so the second step to building this aquarium stand is to build basically an identical brace. This time it is going to be for the bottom of the stand, and this brace is actually really important because it helps evenly spread the weight of the aquarium into the ground. In this case, that brace was constructed out of 2x4s simply because it is sitting on the ground, so we don't have to worry about any kind of sagging going on with that wood. Now the bottom rectangular frame that we're building does have a few more center braces in it, and that's simply because I knew I was going to be putting a sump down inside of the stand, and so I wanted to make sure that I had enough center braces to support the weight of the sump aquarium. And after the top and bottom frames are put together, the next step is to construct the vertical supports. And so without a doubt, the vertical supports on your aquarium stand is by far the most important part of the build, and that is because these vertical supports is what is going to be holding up the weight of your aquarium. And so they're actually constructed in a very specific way that maximizes the strength of the support. And so the first piece of wood that we're going to be screwing in is really only acting as a guide or a support in order for the other pieces of wood to be screwed in and secured to the stand. This guide is cut to the height that you want your aquarium stand to be. So in my case, that was around 30 inches, because 30 inches is a standard size that you will get for most aquarium stands if you were to buy them at a pet store. And it actually is the perfect size for this 90 gallon because when the aquarium is 30 inches off the ground, I can reach in and just touch the bottom. So it's going to make sure that any kind of servicing in the aquarium is going to be really easy for myself, and I won't need any kind of step stool or ladder to get into my aquarium. And so that 2x4 that is acting as our support or guide piece actually gets screwed in on the inside of both the top and bottom box frames. And after that's complete, we can insert the slightly shorter 2x4s, which is going to sit sandwiched in between the top and bottom box frames. And by having it sandwiched in between there, that is the perfect configuration that is going to allow the wood of the 2x4 to support the bulk of the weight from this aquarium stand. And so that way we don't have to worry about our fasteners or screws holding up the weight of the aquarium stand. And when we're attaching these shorter vertical supports, because we have that support or that guide piece as a backing, it gives us a really great place to anchor in a bunch of screws, which ultimately keeps everything in place. Once you have the vertical supports in place, all you have to do is add the next box frame onto the supports and screw everything into place. And at this point, you have the bare bones of your aquarium stand. In fact, a lot of people building aquarium stands stop here, and they do like the look of the exposed dimensional lumber. Structurally speaking, everything is totally sound at this point that you could then put your aquarium on top of it and it would hold the weight of the aquarium. However, there's a few extra things that I did in my aquarium stand here that I personally believe helps prevent issues down the road. And so the first thing that I did was I added a piece of 3/4 inch plywood, and this simply just sits on top and is screwed into the frame of the aquarium stand. And it's going to kind of help smooth out any kind of inconsistencies you have from building out the aquarium stand. After all, because we are putting heavy aquariums on this stand, if there are any kind of uneven portions of the aquarium stand, that could put uneven pressure on your aquarium, which could lead to failure down the road. So for that reason, I do like using that 3/4 inch piece of plywood. I find it helps prevent any kind of issues down the road. And furthermore, I do like to cut out and use a 1/2 inch thick piece of styrofoam and have that ultimately be the piece of material that the aquarium sits on. I find the styrofoam, because the weight of the aquarium helps to sink into the styrofoam, it helps to kind of even out if there's any of those inconsistencies. So that's just a personal preference. I know a lot of people don't like to use styrofoam or any kind of plywood on their aquarium stands, and they have a lot of success. I personally have always done this in my aquarium hobby, and I've never had any issues. So that's really the ultimate reason why I'm going forward using the styrofoam in my aquarium stand. I also added a 3/4 inch piece of plywood on the bottom where the sump is going to go, and that's simply just aesthetics for me. I know I'm going to be opening and closing this aquarium stand quite frequently to access the sump, so I think it looks a little bit better when I have a nice floor where I can put, for example, my CO2 canister as well as the sump and have everything nice and neat inside the aquarium stand. And lastly, I used some tongue and groove pine boards to kind of wrap around the aquarium stand. Ultimately, this aquarium is in my basement, and I want it to act as a piece of furniture that can match with the other furniture in the room. And so I used the pine boards and a nice stain that I found looked pretty good. And to construct the doors, I just cut some scrap pieces of wood on an angle here, and the doors just sit in that kind of groove, and they sit nice and tight together, and it makes it really easy to remove the doors. I don't have to worry about any hinged doors or anything like that. I have total freedom to come into the aquarium stand and service anything that I might have to down the road. All right, so I'm at my desk now, and let's go over some of those calculations that you can use to determine exactly what length you need to cut every single piece of wood in order to build an aquarium stand very similar to the one I have here, except these dimensions are going to be custom to whatever aquarium you're planning on building a stand for. So we'll break this up again into the three components of this basic aquarium stand build, with the first one being the top box frame. And this is very simple because we only have two different types of cuts we have to make for the top box frame. The first cut is going to be the longer pieces of wood that are the longest span that our aquarium stand is going to have to support. And in order to determine how long to cut these pieces of wood, it is simply just the length of your aquarium that you're building the stand for. Now, there are two considerations to keep in mind for whatever aquarium you are building a stand for. The first one is if your aquarium, just like the one I have behind me here, has a black trim, you're going to want to measure the length that the black trim is as opposed to the length of the glass, because the black trim is going to ultimately be the footprint that is sitting on your stand. So you want to make sure that you're cutting your length of wood in order to fit that black trim. Now, another thing that I like to do, and I did for this aquarium stand, is I gave myself a little wiggle room on either side of my aquarium. So the stand is actually a 1/4 inch longer than the aquarium on every dimension. So for example, for my 90-gallon behind me, when I measure the black trim, I actually get 48.5 inches. And if I add a 1/4 inch on either side, that brings me to 49 inches. So I cut this piece of wood at 49 inches long. And the other cut that we have to make for the top box frame is for the shorter pieces that go front to back from the aquarium stand. Now, to determine the length that you need to cut your wood for whatever aquarium you're building this for, you take the width of that aquarium. In my case here with a 90-gallon, when I measure the black trim, it is 18.5 inches from front to back. And again, I want to include a little bit of wiggle room, so I'm going to add a 1/4 inch from the back and a 1/4 inch from the front. And that's going to bring my total to 19 inches. But as you can see, when we construct the box frame, these shorter pieces of wood actually get sandwiched in between the longer horizontal pieces. And so we need to factor in the thickness of each of those two horizontal pieces in our total length. And in fact, what that basically means is we need to subtract 1.5 inches, which is what the thickness of a 2x4 or a 2x6 is, from the front and the back of our length. And so we have 19 inches total that we want our aquarium stand to be, and we're going to subtract 1.5 for the front and 1.5 for the back. So we're subtracting 3 inches from that, and what we get is 16 inches. So if we cut these shorter pieces at 16 inches, by the time we screw everything together, we're going to get the total length that we actually need for our aquarium, which in this case is 19 inches. And as you can see, because we need 3 of these shorter pieces to account for also the center brace, we're going to be cutting 3 of those pieces and 2 of the longer pieces. All right, and so moving on to the next part of the aquarium stand build, which is the bottom box frame. The calculations are actually exactly the same as the top frame that we went over. The only difference, and you may be in a similar situation that I was, is for my aquarium, I was doing 2x6s as my top box frame, and the bottom box frame was 2x4s. So even though the length of cuts is the same, when I was determining all of the amount of wood that I needed to buy for this project, I had to keep those cuts separate because they were using different types of dimensional lumber. However, if you have a slightly smaller aquarium, you may be doing all of this in 2x4s, so you will have a few more of the same cuts that you'll have to make. As you can see as well, for the bottom box frame, I do have a few more center braces, and that is simply because I knew I was going to be putting a sump down there, and I wanted a little bit more cross bracing so that I had some support for that aquarium. But that could be optional depending on how you are planning on building your stand. If you have a sump or you're planning on putting other aquariums inside of your stand, I would recommend including those center braces just for some additional support. All right, and lastly, we are going to talk about the vertical supports. And again, this is really simple because we only have 2 different types of cuts that you have to make for these vertical supports. So the first one is going to be those guides or support pieces that is screwed on the inside portion of the top and bottom box frame. Now for these supports, all you have to do is cut them to whatever height you want your aquarium stand to be. So as I mentioned, I wanted my aquarium stand to be 30 inches from the ground, which is pretty standard for any kind of aquarium stand you could buy at a pet store. Now, of course, we are custom building this aquarium stand, so we can choose to build it however tall or short we want. However, the reason why I stuck with 30 inches was because that was the perfect height for me to reach into the aquarium where I can just barely touch the bottom of the aquarium. So I know that I can service the aquarium and clean the gravel, move plants around, or do whatever I need to do inside of the aquarium without having an additional stool or anything to access the aquarium. So I think this is a very important thing to think about when you're thinking of how tall you want your aquarium to be, so that cleaning your aquarium is not going to be a struggle in the future for you. Another thing to keep in mind is how you like to look at your aquarium. If you like to sit down, maybe you're at a couch, or maybe you like standing to look at your aquariums, you're also going to want to think about that when determining what height you want to build your aquarium stand. As for me, I'm sitting here at my desk, and this aquarium is going to be just off to my left here. So I think this is a perfect height for me to be able to relax in my chair and take a look at the aquarium while I'm working at my desk. So for that first cut, we're going to need 4 of those pieces, 1 for each corner of the aquarium. Now the second cut we're going to make is going to be a little bit shorter, and all we have to do is take whatever number we decided we want our aquarium stand to be, and we're going to subtract the thickness of the top brace and the bottom brace. Now in my case for this aquarium, because I was using 2x6s on the top, I would have to subtract 5.5 inches, which is the actual thickness of those 2x6s. And because I was using 2x4s on the bottom, I would have to subtract 3.5 inches to account for the 2x4s. So altogether, when I'm subtracting the 5.5 and the 3.5 from the total height of 30, I get 21 inches, which is the length that I have to make those cuts. And because I'm using 2 of those for each corner, I need a total of 8 of those vertical supports. And that is all the cuts that we would need. So all you have to do is plug in the length and width of your aquarium that you're looking to build an aquarium stand for, and you'll be able to determine exactly what cuts you need to make for your aquarium stand. Of course, if you also are going the route of including some plywood and 1/2 inch foam for your aquarium, you would also have to include those cuts as the footprint of your aquarium. I don't have a very good tool for cutting plywood, so I was able to get that cut at Home Depot when I was buying the plywood. And the tool they have there to cut plywood is very precise, so I had no issues once I gave them the dimensions that I was looking for. All of the cuts came out perfectly fine. So now I'm going to show you a tool that you can use for free right now that you can use to determine if your aquarium stand is going to be structurally sound to hold whatever weight of the aquarium that you're planning on building it for. And for this, I'm going to bring you into my computer, and we're going to go over a few examples to show exactly how the tool works. So this tool is called the Sagulator, and it is actually a tool used for people that are building shelves to determine how strong a given shelf is depending on the span of the shelf, as well as how much weight that shelf is supposed to hold. And it actually calculates the deflection in the shelf, or how much that shelf bends based on a given load that is put on that shelf. Now, even though this tool is designed for use of people building a shelf, it actually has a lot of use for us when building an aquarium stand. And that is because the horizontal beams that are holding our aquariums essentially act as shelves. And because we know how much, or at least we can plan how much our aquariums are going to weigh, we can calculate how much deflection that is. And this is actually the tool that I used to determine if I was comfortable or not building the top box of my aquarium stand in 2x4s or 2x6s. And I ended up opting for the 2x6s, and I'm going to show you that example here with this tool. So I'll include a link to this tool in the description of this video, so you can go ahead and check that out. But once you get to the website, you're going to have to enter some parameters for the shelf or aquarium stand that we're planning on building. So the first one is shelf material. This one, you can pick all kinds of different wood that you might be constructing your stand out of. Where I'm from, the dimensional lumber is all pine, and for the purposes of getting a close estimate on the deflection of pine, I'm going to be going with eastern white pine, which I also believe is the species of wood that I have locally. So it makes sense that that is most likely the wood that is being made up of all of the 2x4s in my area. So for shelf attachment, we're going to be selecting fixed because we are going to be having some vertical supports on either side of the horizontal beam that we're going to be calculating the sag for. Shelf load is going to be the weight of our aquarium, and we're going to select total here because that is the total weight of our aquarium, as well as the units, which is going to be pounds. Now for determining the weight of our aquarium, or at least for planning purposes, the weight of our aquarium, I'm using the weight of, in this example, a 90-gallon glass aquarium, including the weight of 90 gallons of water. And also for a little bit of additional buffer, I'm including around 100 pounds of miscellaneous gravel, hardscape, and different things that we're going to put in the aquarium. Obviously, as we add hardscape, we're going to be displacing the volume of the aquarium. So it's not going to be 100% accurate, but if anything, we're going to be overestimating the weight of our aquarium so that we have some safety factor built into the stand that we're going to be planning for. So in this case, we'll go with 1,010 pounds. For load distribution, because obviously our aquarium is going to be pretty evenly distributed across the stand, we're going to be going with the uniform load. Now the remaining units we're going to be doing in inches. So for shelf span, this is going to be the width of the aquarium stand that we're planning on building. So in the 90-gallon aquarium stand that I built, that was 49 inches. For the next parameter here, depth actually relates to the depth of the shelf, or in our case, the dimensional lumber that is holding up the aquarium. So as I mentioned earlier, because I used 2x6s, the depth is actually going to be 1.5 inches, which is the actual dimension of a 2x6, and the thickness is 5.5 inches, which again is the actual thickness of a 2x6. We don't have to worry about any of the optional parameters, and after everything is all said and done, we can hit compute sag, and we see that based on the parameters that we input, we are looking at a total sag of 0.01 inches across our 49-inch span. And it's saying that this is acceptable, and it has a little bit extra information here that is saying that the target sag is around 0.02 inches per foot or less, which this is quite a bit less. So as you can see here, the results are showing that by constructing our aquarium stand with 2x6s for our 49-inch span, I shouldn't expect any kind of sag. Now this is very important, and it helps me sleep at night because obviously as the aquarium sags, if it was made out of a thinner piece of wood that isn't as structurally sound as a 2x6, that sag is going to start to put uneven pressure on our aquarium. And at the end of the day, this target here of 0.02 inches per foot is whatever this tool has determined is appropriate for shelves. But because we are building a stand for an aquarium, we really do not want any kind of sag in our beams, because the potential for any kind of uneven pressure being applied back up into our aquarium from it sitting uneven on a stand that is sagging is actually the kind of pressure that can cause seams to bust, and we might have leaks, or even worse, we might have a panel busting off of our aquarium, which would obviously be devastating. So we can use this tool to have a little bit more confidence in our stand and be able to determine what kind of dimensional lumber we need to use for our aquarium. Now just for demonstration purposes, we can go through here and we can actually change the thickness to what a 2x4 thickness would be, which is 3.5 inches. And if we hit compute sag, we get a little bit more sag in it, but at the end of the day, it's still saying this is acceptable. So theoretically, I could have gone through and built this aquarium stand with 2x4s, and that is what this tool is telling us. However, for my own personal comfort and the marginal cost difference that it was to upgrade the dimensional lumber to a 2x6, I decided to spring for the 2x6s just so that I am a lot more confident that this stand is going to last the test of time. Now there's one more really important thing to explain about this tool, and that is that when we input the shelf load into the parameters, we did the total aquarium weight on essentially one of the horizontal beams. Now the way the aquarium stand is constructed, it should evenly distribute the weight of that aquarium on both the front and back horizontal beams. So technically it would be more appropriate to replace the shelf load with whatever half of the weight of the aquarium is, because it is being distributed on two horizontal beams. And if we do that and go back to the compute sag button, we see that even with using a 2x4, we have a very marginal sag. And of course, if we change this to what the dimensions for 2x6 would be and compute the sag, we have a very, very marginal sag. Again, I think it is important to over construct our aquarium stands, especially when you have really heavy aquariums and you want to be absolutely certain that the aquarium stand can hold the weight of the aquarium. I am comfortable using the total weight, assuming that one of the horizontal beams is supporting that. And if I can design the aquarium stand to withstand that amount of weight on one of the horizontal beams and have an acceptable sag as determined by this tool, then I know that if we are having two of the horizontal beams when actually building the stand, then everything is going to be okay and properly supported for our aquarium. And we can go through a few other quick examples here. So a lot of these same parameters. In this case, we are calculating the sag for a 125 gallon glass aquarium. Again, with the weight of the aquarium, accounting for the glass, water weight, and the hardscape and gravel, we have around 1,350 pounds total. And the span of a 125 gallon aquarium is going to be bigger than our 90 gallon, and that is around 73 inches. Again, if we are putting in the dimensions of a 2x4 to see if a 2x4 would be acceptable, what we see here is that we would have around 0.21 inches of sag in the center, which this tool is identifying is excessive, and especially for supporting an aquarium, I would think that that is not super appropriate. However, if we do bump this up to what the dimensions of a 2x6 is and we calculate the sag, we can see that the sag is now pretty marginal and has bumped back to an acceptable range. So if we were building an aquarium stand for a 125 gallon aquarium, I would definitely recommend beefing up the wood for that top box frame to 2x6s. Now, as you can see here, another quick example for a 55 gallon aquarium, we have a total weight of around 680 pounds, a span of 49, and using 2x4s, this tool is telling us that we would have a pretty marginal sag and it would be acceptable to construct it out of that. Now, all this tool tells us is it calculates the sag for our horizontal box frame that is going to be at the top of the stand. However, we still have to account for the vertical supports in our stand, and we need to determine if the weight of our aquarium is going to be properly supported by the vertical supports. Now, this is a little bit more complicated, and there's not a proper tool that I was able to find online to determine this. In fact, the strength of a vertical 2x4 is pretty difficult to calculate because there are a lot of factors such as the type of wood and the length of that 2x4 that comes into play to determine how much weight it can hold before it gives out. From what I could determine doing my research, at least for framing houses, an 8-foot long vertical 2x4 is expected to support around 1,000 pounds. And the strength of that 2x4 is going to dramatically increase depending on how short that 2x4 is. And because the vertical supports in our aquarium stand are around 30 inches tall, I would expect that they could support well over that 1,000 pound limit. And because we are using 8 of those vertical supports, it would be reasonable that this aquarium stand could hold well over 8,000 pounds. Even though this is for a 90 gallon aquarium that we determined is only going to weigh around 1,000 pounds, give or take. So the safety factor here with this aquarium stand is quite high, and I have a lot of confidence that this stand will last a very long time and be able to properly support my 90 gallon aquarium. So now that this aquarium stand is complete, I am super excited to move on to the next stage of this project where I'm going to be setting up and stocking this 90 gallon aquarium. So I hope you'll subscribe and check out some of my future videos on my channel. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, take care.